Hello and welcome to Legal Talk. Today on Legal Talk, we are exploring ChatGPT, the AI-empowered chatbot that has caused media waves across the country, reaching 1 million subscribers in less than a week. What do AI-empowered chatbots mean for organisations and for the legal industry? Should we be worried or excited? My name is Alison Cripps, and I'm a legal writer for LexisNexis, Practical Guidance, Cybersecurity, Data Protection, and Privacy. I'm joined today by Kwok Tang and Raymond Sun from Herbert Smith Freehills. Kwok is a partner at Herbert Smith Freehills' technology, media, and telecommunications practice in Sydney. In his over 20 years of experience, Kwok has advised on complex and strategic projects in the TMT space and has frequently advised on emerging technologies such as drones, automation, and AI. Kwok was part of the expert reference group advising the Australian Human Rights Commissioner on their human rights and technology projects, which looked into the legal and ethical uses of AI. Ray is a technology lawyer in Kwok's team, also based in Sydney. As a skilled developer with experience in building artificial intelligence and Web3 apps, Raymond regularly advises on the most technologically complex matters, including AI, blockchain, crypto, and DAO. Outside of work, Ray is a content creator who regularly posts news updates, coding tutorials, and project vlogs about AI on LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok under the handler techie_Ray. Both Kwok and Ray are co-authors on artificial intelligence and robotics for Practical Guidance, Cybersecurity, Data Protection, and Privacy, content which is now available to subscribers of Practical Guidance Cyber. Welcome, Kwok and Ray.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you, Alison.
No, really appreciate you inviting us to talk about something we're really passionate about, and that's artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and really all things generative AI.
Very excited to have you here. So, Kwok, can I start with you? What is ChatGPT and why is there so much hype?
Sure. So ChatGPT is, as you said, is an artificial intelligence, sort of natural language processing model that's capable of providing human-like responses to questions or prompts. The way ChatGPT works is by predicting the next word in given text based on patterns it's learned from some massive amounts of data that's been fed during its development. A large part of that data is sort of collected from the internet, from social media posts to websites. And this is sort of fine-tuned through various processes, including using human testers. So if you logged on to ChatGPT now, and you can pretty much ask it any question or prompt you want. For example, you could ask it to explain what ChatGPT is, and it'll give you a response not that dissimilar to what I just gave you now. You then may want to sort of fine-tune it in a number of ways, saying, can you give me that answer as if you explain it to a 7-year-old, and it'll be able to fine-tune that response to a way which it thinks a 7-year-old can understand. So it's really quite an intuitive tool.
Wow. And it sounds pretty exciting. Ray, will it replace lawyers or content generators?
So, that's often a common question that we get asked by clients and also just people within the market. There are 3, general views that we can talk about. So, and there are 2 extreme ends. So one bookend is no, it won't replace lawyers. Law is one of those fields where it's very intellectually challenging, and it's a discipline that requires very high advanced application of the law to fact scenarios, which is something that natural language models such as the GPT series that powers ChatGPT might not be able to comprehend at the same level that humans can. So that's one argument. The other bookend, which is, yes, it will replace lawyers. There is certain optimism in that AI will get to a level that's so advanced that will do any type of drafting, any type of document review, or even statutory review that lawyers do today. And that is quite a future state, and it's very keen to see if the AI can reach that level. But what Kwok and I like to talk about is like the midway ground, which is AI can, including generative AI such as ChatGPT, can replace certain functions and tasks of lawyers. But from the grand scheme of things, it probably won't replace lawyers for the time being. It'll most likely free up more time for lawyers to focus on the more strategic and high value work, such as actually applying laws to the facts, or in reviewing certain very complicated contracts, or managing large deals. What ChatGPT can potentially help with is assist with narrow tasks such as drafting, where you have a very specific prompt and you just want to find some wording for it. It could potentially help you produce the first draft for you, which the lawyer can then review manually to make sure it's correct. And that's probably the key caveat when it comes to any sort of AI application, especially applications that generate content. As Kwok mentioned, these are just natural language models, which at the very core, they just predict one word after another. They don't inherently understand the subject matter or content. So there's a really strong need for quality assurance, and for lawyers especially, to make sure the content is reliable, it's safe, and to make any necessary amendments. So yeah, that's probably our view of when it comes to these sort of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and Alison, it's the way we see it is probably no different to any other legal tech that's out there. Is really designed to make our lives a lot easier. Here at Herbert Smith Freehills, we have a whole sort of legal automation, legal tech team whose sole job is to build legal techs that's designed to make our lives a lot easier. And will it ever replace lawyers? No, it will replace some functions. So the same thing would apply to generative AI like ChatGPT. Ray will probably be too humble to mention, but he in his spare time also writes a lot of legal tech, and there's a whole bunch of tools that he's written and worked on, which make our lives a lot easier.
I can imagine. I'm recalling back to my early days and thinking I would have appreciated having some of these tools available when I was burning the midnight oil. But Ray, you were saying?
Yeah, so just one example to add on to Kwok's point about this sort of issues is not that much different from any other automation tool or any legal tech that uses to enhance a lawyer's job. So one tool that I contributed and co-developed is a tool that can extract public search reports and automatically put them into a due diligence report that can then send to clients for these sort of big deals. And it's a type of tool that can automate what normally takes a few hours into a few seconds. But that tool itself hasn't taken away any jobs yet. In fact, it has made our jobs much easier, and also it just made everyone's life easier, and the role of the lawyer has been more enhanced. So for juniors, where compared to the previous state where they will spend so many hours doing mindless copy and pasting, they can now have more time to focus on the really key skills such as drafting, contract review, etc. And I think these sort of automation tools, including which includes AI generally, I think it has helped me become a better lawyer if you know how to use them appropriately and smartly. And yeah, I think it's gonna change the role of the lawyer, but in a better way. Yeah.
Sounds good. But presumably, Kwok and Ray, these AI tools, they come with risks. What are some of the general risks and the issues with AI?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you also mentioned earlier about our practice notes. So we outlined 5 key or big challenges that applies to not just ChatGPT, but just AI in general. So the big 5 are bias, explainability, privacy, IP, and accountability. I can just go through them one by one real quick. So bias, also known as algorithmic bias, is when an AI, especially when it's used in the decision-making process, produces a decision that discriminates a certain demographic, either favorably or unfavorably. And that is often because AI relies on the data that's trained on to make those predictions. And if the data itself is biased, then that will produce biased outcomes. So hence the common adage, garbage in, garbage out. Explainability is also known as the black box problem. So one of the unique aspects about AI compared to other tools is that even those who built the AI system don't really know how the AI actually produces its decisions. There's a complex explanation for this, but basically, whenever you feed data into an AI system, it analyzes that data to find hidden connections and patterns within those data sets to then create, in a way, its own policy or its own framework for the purpose of making decisions. Now, these hidden connections are not what humans can naturally understand and interpret. So there's quite a bit of a lack of transparency between how the AI works and how we understand it. And that has big implications from a legal perspective, because let's just say if an AI makes a decision that you're unhappy with and you want to challenge that decision, how do you challenge it if you don't know what's reasoning? So that's implications from a fairness perspective and legal procedural perspective. Next is privacy. So obviously AI relies on data, and that data contains personal information that has privacy implications. IP, this is especially relevant for generative AI such as ChatGPT. If, let's just say, a text-to-art generator produces a artwork that resembles an original artwork that was trained on, big questions are, number one, who owns the IP in the AI-generated output? And number two, does the AI-generated output infringe on copyright of the original artwork? And these are huge questions that are currently being litigated across the US and UK. And they're definitely something the whole world is looking towards, just to get some clarity on those IP questions. And finally, accountability. There's still quite a lot of uncertainty around the world as to who is liable when an AI system goes wrong. There are lots of competing theories. It can get to a very academic, theoretical level as to what is an AI system, whether it qualifies for personhood or whoever's liability should be attached to the AI system. There's no clear answer yet, and different countries around the world are having different approaches to these sort of questions. So these are the big, quick rundown of the big 5 issues, and maybe Kwok will just talk about specific issues on ChatGPT.
Yeah, maybe touching upon on the first ones you mentioned, which is explainability. One of the sort of common criticisms of ChatGPT is it sort of generates this text based on the question, but it doesn't necessarily cite the sources. So it lacks that explainability or traceability of the information which it's basing its answer on. So for someone who might not be able to verify the information, have experience or knowledge to verify the information coming from the answer, there's a risk that it's basically just wrong and you can't recognize it. In fact, I think that's something that's Microsoft has recognized, and they're currently trialing Bing, which is their sort of search engine, with coupled with ChatGPT model, and it's currently going through testing. And I had to go at it actually yesterday, and you can see it's actually cites the sources for the sentences, so it allows you to track through and work out whether the source is credible or not, and also just to get more information if you need to. So if you remember how I answered your first question about the data that it pulls together is really from the internet, and obviously with the internet, there's going to be information which is factually correct, and there's also plenty of information which might not be so true. So being able to see the actual source, you can make your own assessment around the credibility of the answer that's been provided. Another issue is probably IP. I might actually throw that over to Ray to talk about IP, because we very recently advised a client on this Ray issue, and Ray was all over that.
Yeah, so IP is out of the five is another big one that these days quite a few of our clients are interested in learning more about. And we've been helping them, create some guidelines and like guardrails around proper use of generative AI so that they don't accidentally tread on IP risks and issues. But one of the core IP issues, which I said earlier, is it's like whether an AI generated output infringes on the copyright of the original training output. And there are quite a few, as I mentioned before, quite a few lawsuits going on that on this question. So one of them is currently a class action against Stability AI, DeviantArt, and Midjourney. So these are companies that have that developed and provide a text to art generator service. And they are now subject to a class action in the US that's on this very question, whether the art that their generators produce infringe upon the IP of all the original artwork that it was used to train on. And it's quite an interesting matter that really goes to how the court interprets the technical process behind the AI system. And there are lots of competing arguments on it. So just to be very brief about it, if you look at the AI system at a very technical level and how it produces the actual images, there could be argument that the AI art it generates is original, whereas if you abstract away from the process and see it as a big picture thing, if there's any sort of resemblance between the output and the original training input, then there could be an argument for copyright infringement. These are what the academics and people are saying about this case. And there's also, so that's on the art side, and there's also another similar lawsuit in the US again on the code side. So there's a case on GitHub Copilot, which is basically a text to code generator. That's also been subject to a class action as to whether the code that they produced, whether it infringes upon the open source licenses that surround the code that it was trained on. So these are still ongoing, and yeah, it's very interesting to see how the court will decide. Either way, it will have likely have implications for the award of AI. Yeah.
Yeah. Alison, it sort of reminds me a little bit of the early days of open source, where there's lots of particular IP issues concerning about the use, and assessing clients, and there's concern about lawsuits and copyright infringement and copyleft provisions and losing their proprietary code and all these issues. And eventually they sort of iron itself out. And it's very much nowadays with open source, it's not so much whether you should use open source or not. I think people recognize it's a really efficient and actually safe way to build code or build software, but it's more about safe use. So I think we'll find that with time, with generative AI such as ChatGPT and others, as things develop and cases are settled, and people will start to understand how to use it in a way that doesn't infringe really sort of either sort of people proprietary IP rights or regulations that may exist that may potentially apply to use.
Yeah, and I like Kwok's point about safe use, because ultimately AI and other forms of automation, they're just tools or means for people to enhance their work or streamline their work. So yeah, we don't always need to jump to conclusions and say like, we need to ban AI or whatever. It's all about setting those safe use, safe conduct, and make sure that people use them responsibly, and we can then maximize the value of AI in a safe and responsible manner. Yeah.
We actually coined a phrase which we're hoping to popularize. Generative AI is about inspiration, not delegation. So you could use generative AI to inspire you to develop whatever materials you're trying to develop. And you need to add obviously your own ideas and creations into that, but you shouldn't use it just for pure delegation in terms of passing the buck in terms of the task you're intending to do. So hopefully that catches on, but who knows? It's a very fast moving world. So inspiration, not delegation.
So you both fall on the excited rather than worried side of AI generation.
Well, for someone who doesn't have any sort of artistic talent, I'm all for
it. And as all emerging technologies, often the pace of the emergence outweighs regulation that might follow. What's the Australian regulatory landscape like for AI?
Yeah, so Australia has it's still a developing regulatory landscape, and I can just start off by saying we don't have mandatory legislation on AI yet directly, but we do have an ethics framework that sets voluntary guidelines and standards on how you should adopt AI. So there's the Commonwealth ethical standards. And supporting that, we have a bunch of existing regulation that can regulate certain aspects of AI, even though they don't explicitly state AI. So for example, there's the Privacy Act, which regulates privacy issues regarding to AI, as you can use data to train AI. There's also IP, which regulates the IP issues, and consumer law protection. Yeah.
And the framework is really about, if you sort of take a step back, Alison, it's really about managing risk and harm. So depending on the way you use the AI tool, or sometimes the sort of automated decision-making tools, what's the output coming out of it and what's being used. If it relates to something which may impact someone's sort of interests, either property interests or access to healthcare, access to education, access to visa status, those sorts of things, really require some really robust approach around some of the things that key principles around transparency, for example, explainability, and all the issues that Ray was talking about earlier, versus where an AI tool which might be managing the efficiencies of train timetables, right? That may be less impactful in terms of people's day-to-day lives. So it may be less stringent in terms of the checks and balances around that particular tool. So it's really, at the moment, really focused on the potential harm the AI tool can potentially create, and really assessing the risk and having those checks and balances. And there's some really great tools, including sort of government tools, available for people to check against whether to use AI, and then really, this one of the Ray's favorite words, to use it responsibly. So it's really about responsible AI use, and in many respects, the use of ChatGPT and others is also about really sort of responsible use. So it's a great tool, but if people misuse it, such as presenting ChatGPT material as their own original material, I think that you sort of very slippery slope. You obviously see issues around students using those type of tools to answer their assignments and stuff like that, which is problematic. And then there's obviously the counter tools where you get people producing tools which could see whether answers are using the sort of GAI. So it's all fast developing pace at the moment.
Yeah, I like how Kwok mentioned all these examples. It just goes to show all the different variables and factors you have to consider when it comes to setting any regulation or policy around AI, because it's such a broad field. And it's all about the balance. And each jurisdiction has their own approach to balance based on their own political, economical, cultural values. And so, since we're on the topic of Australian regulation, I can briefly just mention how it compares to other jurisdictions. So one of probably the more, developed jurisdictions on AI regulation is European Union. So they have a draft AI Act right now that's still in draft, but it's a comprehensive one-stop shop regulation that aims to set standards on AI generally across the entire European Union region. So it's one of those comprehensive one-stop shop we see it's a broad brush approach to AI. And then on the other hand, you have jurisdictions like China, which have taken a more targeted approach to AI. So instead of regulating AI generally, they're taking it by application and by sector. So for example, early last year, they enacted this internet recommendation regulation that specifically targets recommendation algorithms, including those powered by AI, making sure that it recommends content fairly and doesn't produce harmful outcomes. And also last year, they released a regulation on deep synthesis technology, which is what they used to call generative AI. Again, making sure that there are standards on generative AI and doesn't cause harmful outcomes. So they're doing it sector by sector, application by application. Australia sits quite similarly along with the US, Singapore, and other advanced economies in terms of have taken a hybrid approach where we have soft frameworks in place as ethical voluntary guidelines to kind of give some ideas to how AI should be used, but not too stringent that might stifle innovation, but also relying on existing bespoke legislation such as privacy, IP, consumer protection to regulate certain aspects of AI. So there's no right or wrong answer. Really depends on the country's own conditions, but it will be interesting to see how these regulation approaches will develop over the next few years, and we'll see whether countries will start to, I guess, exchange ideas and build upon each other, which is very cool space, especially for lawyers like Kwok and I. Yeah,
absolutely. It's been wonderful having you, Kwok and Ray. We could talk about AI forever, I think. It's such a fascinating and exciting area of law. Really appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we can't keep going forever. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.